The Chicago Bears need to be ready for the potential worst-case scenarios in the upcoming NFL draft. But when you start to go through what those might look like, you realize there really isn't much that's all that terrible.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on X at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we look through a few different potential worst-case scenarios for the Chicago Bears in the NFL draft to figure out what Ryan Poles could still do so that we know it can't get any worse than this. And surprisingly, when you go through this process, you're left feeling like, even in the worst case, you'll still be ending up coming out okay. We'll look at what happens if maybe the quarterback class isn't actually as well liked as we think they are on the outside, and a bunch of players the Bears want go before they're on the clock with the 9th overall pick. We'll also look at what happens if, say, the Bears decide to trade down, but after you trade down, all the players you wanted to trade down for come off the board before you get to pick again. And we'll also look at what could happen if a team wants to jump the Chicago Bears at 9 and steal the player the Bears might be coveting at that spot. In any of these situations, they're probably not all that likely, right? Well, how likely is the true worst case scenarios here? Probably not very likely, but it's good to be prepared because it is possible, if unlikely, but still possible, and say, okay, what if we're going to be Ryan Poles together? What would we do then if the worst happens on draft day? And that's what I want to get into, starting with the Bears staying at the 9th overall pick, right? How could the first 8 picks in this draft go in potentially the worst possible order for Ryan Poles? And how even then, you still, I think, will have stuff that you like with that 9th pick. So, I want to go through sort of a hypothetical mock draft here. And it's not worthwhile to go and argue specifically about, are we sure the Giants would take this player? And are we sure the Titans would take this player? I'll go through players that I think is at least somewhat realistic or reasonable that these teams might draft these guys, right? We're not just throwing stuff at the wall and saying, Dallas Turner goes number 3 and Joe Alt goes number, we're not just taking guys off the board for the sake of it, but I think it's a realistic enough worst case scenario, and then talk about what that leaves the Bears with the 9th overall. So if let's say in this worst case scenario that the sort of the theme here is that it turns out these teams aren't as crazy about this quarterback class as we think they are. Now, in all likelihood, we're going to see at least 3 quarterbacks go in the top 8 of this draft, possibly 4. Teams will probably want to trade up for quarterbacks. But what if they don't? It's a possibility, even if it's unlikely. I still think for sure, obviously, quarterback's going 1 to the Bears. And I think for sure, quarterback's going 2 to the Commanders. And it sounds like it's going to be Jaden Daniels at this point, but we'll see. But let's say after that, no one else is really eager to trade up for a quarterback. And even the teams in the top 10 that could use a quarterback, like the Giants, for example, maybe they're not crazy about him either, or the Patriots, and say, yeah, we like the quarterbacks later on in this draft. We just wanted Caleb, and now we don't really want anyone else. So say it's Caleb Williams 1, Jaden Daniels 2, and I'm not doing trades in this. I mean, you could throw teams in here, but it's more important about the players that come off the board as opposed to specifically what teams take them. But let's say Marvin Harrison goes to the Patriots at 3. They stay there and take a wide receiver. Arizona Cardinals at 4, stay there and take a wide receiver because no one wants to trade up for these quarterbacks in our hypothetical worst case scenario. Say the Chargers then go offensive tackle for Jim Harbaugh, and say Joe Alt comes off the board because I think these tackles are going to go sooner than a lot of people think because teams traditionally really value the offensive tackles in the drafts. And the Giants at 6, okay, We don't like any of these quarterbacks, so we'll just grab a wide receiver for Daniel Jones and keep building that way. So, Harrison, Neighbors, Alt, Adunze go 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the Titans at 7 still want to tackle, so say Olu Fashanu is sort of the next best offensive tackle, comes off the board there. And the Falcons want an edge rusher, so Dallas Turner comes off the board there. Then you're sitting at the 9th overall pick, where all 3 top receivers are gone, top 2 tackles are gone, and the top edge rusher are gone because no one wanted quarterbacks. Harrison Jr., Neighbors, Adunze, gone. Alt and Fashanu, gone. Dallas Turner, gone. That to me is about as close of a worst case scenario of the top 8 picks as you could reasonably expect to assign to those teams for the Chicago Bears, right? Every player taken besides Jaden Daniels is a player you would have wanted. You would have wanted Marvin Harrison. You would have wanted Neighbors. You would have wanted Alt. You wanted Odunze. You wanted Dallas Turner. You may want Olu Fashanu as a really good second best offensive tackle in this draft class. So you left at 9 with really like 7 guys that you loved all came off the board, plus Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. And it's like, crap. Those were like all of our top favorite targets early on in this draft. And yet, even in this seemingly like worst case scenario where you load the top 8 with all the guys you loved the most, none of the corners came off the board, none of the other QBs came off the board, like all the players you would have liked at 9, or all players that you would have liked at 9 go in the top 8, there's still players you like with the 9th overall pick. Like that's the great thing about where the Chicago Bears sit in this draft, is that even if all 3 receivers are gone and your edge rusher is gone and your offensive tackles are gone, you've still got Jared Verse, the edge rusher from Florida State. You've still got Leatu Latu, the edge rusher from UCLA. You still have Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle from Texas. You still have, I suppose you still have the ability to trade down, although again, we're trying to make it a worst case scenario, so you might not trade down in that case, but like you can still get edge rushers you like here. You can still get defensive tackles you like here. If you're someone who really likes the Oregon State offensive tackle Talise Fuaga, I don't really see him as a left tackle in the NFL, but he's still considered a top 10 caliber player that's still on the board here. Like if you really wanted to go offensive tackle, there's still a guy there. There's still edge rushers there. It's probably too early to take the next wide receiver like Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, but like there's still at least 2 or 3 or 4, depending, or maybe Brock Bowers. Maybe you're the Brock Bowers guy. Like he's still here too. Like there's no combination of the first 8 picks that are going to remove everyone you like from the Bears' ability to take them. Like there's always going to be at least somebody that you're happy with at the 9th overall pick. Like, I don't think anybody's going to be super mad if they take Byron Murphy. No one's going to be super mad if they take Jared Verse. No one's going to be super mad if they take Leatu Latu. Like that might not be your preferred pick. It might not be the player you want the most. You most likely wanted one of these guys that's off the board. Like that's why it's a worst case scenario. But it's really not that bad. And to me, like, that's such a reassuring thing about this Bears draft. It's not like you're sitting there holding out hope, like, man, you really need one of these 2 guys to make it to the 9th overall pick, or else, man, who are we going to take? Like, we're screwed if we can't get this guy to fall to us at 9. We got to make sure we go up and get him in the top 8. Like, no, there are guys you would love to have, but there's always going to be somebody that makes it down to 9, even in the worst case scenario. And that's where I feel like if I'm Ryan Poles, I'm feeling pretty good about how I'm approaching this year's draft, that I'm prepared for all the guys I like to not be there and still be happy with what you come away with. Maybe you're not elated. Maybe you're not sprinting to the podium for that guy. Maybe you're not thinking, wow, we got to steal the draft, but you're still always guaranteed a guy you like, a guy who is very talented, a top 10 caliber player in this draft at positions of relative need for this Bears team. You're not going to be stuck feeling like you're reaching to get a player that you like. There's still going to be players that you feel like are worth that pick at that spot, literally no matter who goes in the top 8. And that's a really cool place for the Bears to be in. It allows Ryan Poles to hold all the cards, including the ability to trade down. But trading down comes with some risk because you can't control who comes off the board before you pick at that next spot. So we'll look at what a worst case scenario might look like if the Bears trade down and then more players they love come off of that board next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and to level it up to peak performance. We're talking superchargers, exhaust kits, LED headlights, roof racks, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're guaranteed to burn rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So let's say we go through a different worst case scenario here. You get to 9, you get an offer to trade down, and I guess we could go through, in theory, worst case trade down offers that teams maybe aren't that willing to trade down with you. But like let's stick specifically on like what players the Bears could still get in this draft and how the board might fall in the worst possible ways. That, okay, if you're trading down from 9, adding some extra picks, which is already, I think, one of the better case scenarios in my personal opinion. And by the way, next week we'll do a mock draft Monday version of the best case scenarios to go with the worst case scenario today to kind of balance it out. But the point being, say you trade down, and much like when we went through the first one, like I'm not as worried about, okay, which team and how much would they give, but like I'm just kind of running through a hypothetical, realistic worst case scenario here of guys you really like come off the board. And to be clear, like this is not a continuation of the first mock draft. This is not one mock draft because obviously we traded with the Bears, and so that this is 2 separate drafts. So we're gonna look at like the Bears trading down here and ignore like the first 10 picks and kind of look at like between 9 and wherever the Bears trade down to, how players could come off the board that you would really like and that you were hoping somebody would make it down there when you traded down to still get a guy you liked while adding those picks and having moved down even a little bit further. So like say, I'm going to throw out like a hypothetical trade down to 17 with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like that's a pretty big move from 9 to 17. You're going to get a second round pick and some change in there, but you feel like if you move down to 17, maybe you can still land one of the edge rushers you like. Maybe you can still get an offensive tackle you like or a defensive tackle you like, or, the next receiver or another, you're getting close to some of the other offensive linemen that might be in the conversation there. But say you trade down to 17 and then at 10, the Jets take Brock Bowers as kind of everyone's expecting. And let's kind of continue this, like no one wants the QBs theme, or maybe in this scenario, the QBs all went in the top 6. And so the Vikings or the Broncos or the Raiders never had the opportunity to trade up for J.J. McCarthy or Drake May or Jaden Daniels or whoever. So they have to stay here at these picks and take other players. So the Jets go Brock Bowers at 10, and the Vikings stay at 11 and go an edge rusher to replace Danielle Hunter. They get Jared Verse from Florida State. And let's say the Broncos stay at 12 and also want an edge rusher like Latu. And again, we don't need a nitpick. Like, well, would the Broncos really take Latu there? Like, edge isn't a huge need for them, but I think it's possible they could go edge there. Like I'm not here to like debate every other team's needs and say, well, maybe they won't go there. Like just roll with me for a second here. Say, because we could do these in other orders in the same kind of players, but the point is the players that come off the board, not specifically the teams they go to. So like Bowers and then Jared Verse and Latu come off 11 or 10, 11, 12, and say the Raiders at 13 go tackle and get Olu Fashanu. Maybe the Saints at 14 grab an interior pass rusher like Byron Murphy from Texas. The Colts at 15 go a wide receiver like Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU. Seahawks at 17 go Johnny Newton, the Illinois defensive tackle. And now you're sitting here at 17, and now all your edge rushers are gone, at least the big 3, right? Turner, Verse, and Latu are gone. Your top 2 offensive tackles are gone in Joe Alton, Olu Fashanu. Your top 4 wide receivers are gone in the big 3 at the top that we talked about, and then now Brian Thomas Jr. is off the board. And both of the interior pass rushers that you like, Byron Murphy from Texas and Johnny Newton from Illinois, are also off the board. And now all of a sudden, there's not really, like it feels like it's too early to take the next edge rusher. Someone like a Chop Robinson here would feel like a little bit of a reach. He's more of a later first round type of a projection than actually like a mid. We're still at 17. It's still more or less the middle of the first round here, but all of a sudden, there's not really an edge rusher in reach. A wide receiver, maybe A.D. Mitchell from Texas, but like, that still feels a little bit early for him. I don't know if he's that great. Like, he's good. And not a bad player, but or like Lad McConkey from Georgia, it's the same conversation. It's like, I love those guys at 27, but not 17, and then that's where, again, we're talking about worst case scenarios here. That's where a lot of it's like, yeah, there are guys here that I would like later. And maybe, could you find a trade down option here? I suppose, but even in this kind of a worst case scenario, I still feel like there's a couple guys here in this spot where I was intentional and probably forced guys in here that are probably not as realistic to go to those teams. Like if all the guys you wanted here, the edge rushers, the defensive tackles, the wide receiver, the tackle, like it's unlikely that Verse and Latu and Fashanu and Murphy and Thomas and Newton are all going to go off in this order. But even if it did, someone like J.C. Latham from Alabama, the left tackle, or I mean, he played right tackle with them, but I think he could play left tackle in the NFL and has played some guard in the past there. Like I think either he or Darnell Wright could move to left tackle and feel like you've got your bookend tackles there. Like Latham is not as good as Joe Alt. He's not as good as Olu Fashanu. But I think he's got the kind of foot speed and coordination in general, like just moves well at the tackle position. He's only 21 years old, and he's big and long and strong. Like I think that's a guy who could play left tackle in the NFL. And boom, like am I thrilled that I traded down to 17 and landed the third or fourth best offensive tackle in this draft? No, but I don't leave for the first round thinking, man, I got nothing. Didn't get anything I like. Like you still got a first-round caliber left tackle who I think, as much as I do like Braxton Jones and don't think they need to draft a left tackle, he would be a day one starting upgrade over Braxton Jones. I think at 17, you could start to enter the conversation of someone like Jackson Powers Johnson, the center from Oregon, or it's the way that the draft community has kind of moved at this point. Everyone's expecting the Duke offensive tackle Graham Barton to be taken before Jackson Powers Johnson and move to center like a Cody Whitehair did. What's that been, almost a decade ago now, which is crazy. But like you could take a center here. Would it be a little bit early? Yeah. Would I be thrilled about taking a center at 17? No, I wouldn't be thrilled about it, but I would feel like, wow, I just got my 10-year starting center to bolster the weakest position on my offensive line. And if that's what I come away with at the end of the first round, plus all the draft picks I got to trade down from 9 to this point, then I feel like, okay, then I'm for sure getting a second-round pick to move to 17. A second-round pick and something else. So I can use that second-round pick on an edge rusher, and then my third-round pick on a wide receiver, and my fourth-round pick on a safety or whatever, and get everything I wanted out of this draft, even after I traded down and missed on all the players I would have liked the most. Like I probably would have taken any of those guys that are off the board here ahead of J.C. Latham or Graham Barton or Jackson Powers Johnson or, pick your wide receiver. Like I would have taken pretty much any of these guys there. But in the worst case scenario where, 6 straight guys that I would have loved, Verse, Latu, Fashanu, Murphy, Thomas Jr., Newton, all come off the board in order, I'm still getting a guy that I feel all right about. Like, obviously, this is a very unlikely worst case scenario because there's not a single cornerback in that group, and this is a good cornerback class. Like, at least 1 or 2 cornerbacks is going to come off in the first 17 picks here. Like, there's going to be one of these guys is going to fall, for sure. And maybe it's Brock Bowers that falls and not any of the other guys you like. But, like, realistically, not all these guys are going to be off the board. But there's a 1% chance that they could. And even in that 1% worst case scenario, there's still a couple good offensive linemen I like. There's still a couple of receivers that are borderline close enough to maybe take here, or maybe you could trade down again at that point. And we kind of talked about like the edge rushers. Like, would this be too early for Chop Robinson? I think so, but could I talk myself into it? Maybe. I mean, again, I wouldn't love it, but like you could talk yourself into it. Like that's where it's like, okay, in the worst case scenario, I'm not mad. Like I'm not happy, but I'm not mad. And it again feels like a reminder of how Ryan Poles really controls the cards here. There's guaranteed to be players he likes at 9. And if he trades down, there's almost certainly guaranteed to be players that, at the very least, if you don't love, you like. Like, I mean, everywhere in this draft, you can still find guys you like. You're not going to trade down into a zone here where the only good players on the board are players you don't like, because the Bears are in a position to take almost any position in the first round. Like, right, your ability, your team building strategy here is get talented players and figure it out later. Like, if you traded down, the only positions you're not going to draft in a trade down at this point, guard, probably linebacker, and cornerback. There's not really a safety that you would take, but if there was a good safety in this class, you might consider taking a safety there. You're not going to draft the first round linebacker. You're not going to draft the first round guard. You're not going to draft the first round corner. But almost anything else after a trade down, you would consider drafting a player at wide receiver, tackle, center, tight end only because it's Brock Bowers. I guess running back. We'll throw running back in there too. But like defensive tackle, defensive end, safety. Like there are so many positions that if they're the best player available, you're not going to be mad about taking them even with a first round pick because it's about adding quality players. So the Bears are always going to have an option you like no matter where they're drafting and almost no matter what order other players come off the board. So you're always going to have some kind of backup option. It's a matter of really getting the guys you might like. And one of the other potential worst case scenarios is that you're sitting there at 9 and the guy you love is working his way towards you and someone jumps you with a trade, snipes you at the last minute, and makes you lose the guy you really wanted. We'll go through what that might look like and what teams to watch out for next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan, when it's halftime, your scoreboard's not looking good, you're feeling low, you're not sure you or your team can pull out a win, so you got to dig deep, lift your head up, look in the mirror, you say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game. Pull off some bank heists and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards that help you compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards all at the same time. You can make your friends bankrupt by literally smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. And you can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in-game tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. This episode of Locked On Bears is also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, plus you got the baseball season in full swing. So FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 added into your account, win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs and slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can even bet on the upcoming NFL draft, on what position each team is going to take, what players are going to go where in what pick, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Get your $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose, by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon and making your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. One of the other ways the draft could go poorly, and I use poorly in quotation marks here because you're always left with something you like, but one of the other potential worst case scenarios for Ryan Poles is that he and Matt Eberflus and Ian Cunningham, they sit together, they put together their draft board throughout this process, and they look and say, okay, we really love this player. There's one player in the top of this draft that they just really feel like Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the guy, or Malik Neighbors is really, Rome Odunze is the receiver that's going to put us over the top, that we think is a future Hall of Famer that's going to be perfect for Caleb Williams, and we just really, really want to get him. But, we called the Giants about trading up, and they want to stay there to get a quarterback. We called the Chargers, but they really want to stay there and get their guy. No one's really letting us move up because they all have guys that they really like. So we're stuck at 9, and there's a player we love, and we need him to fall to us at 9. Maybe that player is Rome Odunze or one of the receivers. Maybe that player is Joe Alt, and you feel like this is our Hall of Fame left tackle. It's going to be Caleb Williams' blindside blocker for 15 years before he gets his gold jacket. Or maybe it's Dallas Turner. It's like, this is the edge rusher we want to pair with Dallas Turner. With Montez Sweat. We think this guy is, it's not a great comp, like a Von Miller type, right? This is our future Hall of Famer, 10 sack a year guy, long-term franchise pair that he and Montez Sweat are going to give us the best dynamic edge rushing duo in the NFL. And we just need him to fall to us at 9. And the problem is there are plenty of other teams that may also covet that wide receiver, that offensive tackle, and that edge rusher that could just as easily jump you and trade up to, say, the 8th overall pick with the Falcons and get that guy. And I guess, okay, in this hypothetical scenario, could you also negotiate with the Falcons and try and trade with them before someone else jumps you and move one spot? Like if the Falcons are willing to trade down with another team, then in theory, they'd be willing to trade down with the Bears one spot. If they're willing to trade down with, say, the Saints 6 spots, then why wouldn't they trade with the Bears one spot? But you could flip that the other way and say, well, if the team like the Falcons is trading with the Bears one spot, they're only going to get a 4th round pick. If they're trading with the Saints, they're going to get a 3rd round pick plus. And maybe the Falcons say, well, it's not worth us to move one spot. We'd rather make the bigger jump down because we don't care. And they're willing to give us more. So we're going to go farther down and not trade with you one spot and let the Saints or the Vikings or whoever jump you to get the player you might want. So I want to go through like what teams might jump the Bears for that player in one of these potential, like, again, worst case scenario. Almost devalues the term worst case scenario because it's really not all that bad. Like if you look at the teams picking after the Bears, it's the Jets, the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders, the Saints, the Colts, the Seahawks, the Jaguars, and the Bengals are 10 through 18. Obviously, teams from farther down could jump even farther, but like those are like the next 10 spots that might be able to move within 10 to get to 8 to get past the Chicago Bears that might be interested in one of these kind of guys that the Bears might covet. And I apologize, you can hear me continuing to still lose the last parts of my voice here, but we're powering through to get through these worst case scenarios. And hopefully as the week goes on, my voice regains some strength throughout this process. But I want to go through like, okay, say the Bears really covet Rome Odunze. This is the receiver they want more than anything, and they're watching him fall, and he gets past the first 6 picks, gets past the Titans at 7, the Falcons are on the clock at 8, and it's like, man, we're 1 pick away from getting Rome Odunze. Who might jump up to get him if they really want to get Odunze and beat out the Bears for that receiver? And you look at every team picking after the Bears, again, Jets, Vikings, Broncos, Raiders, Saints, Colts, Seahawks, Jaguars, Bengals. I think every single team there, except for the Vikings and the Seahawks, could realistically need a wide receiver and be willing to trade up and get one. The Jets signed Mike Williams, and they still have Garrett Wilson and Alan Lazard, but like you could see a scenario where the Jets are all in on Aaron Rodgers and let's get him another elite receiver and jump the Bears one spot to get him. The Vikings have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. I don't think they're really going to move up for a receiver at that point. And some of these teams like the Broncos, I think, are a little less likely, but they could. I mean, they still have Cortland Sutton, but they don't really have like a number 3 there after getting rid of Jerry Jeudy. It's Sutton and Mims, and I guess they signed Josh Reynolds. So like, are they really going to be aggressive after a wide receiver? Probably not, but you can't rule it out. Same with the Raiders. Like you got Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow. Jacoby Myers, not Hunter Renfrow. They got Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, but they don't really have a good third one there. And in the NFL, you like to have 3 great receivers. You got Trey Tucker, but he's just kind of okay to me. So like, are they a team that I'm worried are really going to make the jump? No, but they could. Any of these teams could use a receiver. The Saints could use a third man with Chris Olave, and I can't remember the name of their number 2 right now, but the Colts could use a third receiver. The Jaguars could always go after another receiver. The Bengals, I think, could also go after another receiver, depending on what they do with T. Higgins, but they let Tyler Boyd go. Like, I think the Seahawks are pretty locked in with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. And I think the Vikings are pretty locked in too. But like any of those other teams, I wouldn't be shocked if they moved up for a wide receiver. I don't think most of them will, but it wouldn't be like, whoa, that's out of nowhere. Like, so any of these teams could jump the Bears, grab that receiver, and leave you unhappy. When it comes to like, say, Joe Alt is the guy you really like. You're hoping Joe Alt makes it to the 9th pick, and he gets to 8, same kind of scenario. It's like, okay, 1 pick away. Falcons are trading down. I think the Jets could use an offensive tackle and could jump you. I think the Broncos are in that conversation, but Garrett Bowles is getting older, so there's some talk that they could go offensive tackle. I think first round's a little early, but I think they're at least in that conversation, but maybe not super likely. The Raiders, I think, could move up for a tackle. The Saints are running into issues with Ryan Ramczyk. They're widely expected to take a tackle in the first round. They could trade up for one if Joe Alt is falling. Seahawks could use an upgraded tackle. The Bengals could use an upgraded tackle. I think there's 4 or 5 or 6 teams there picking after the Bears that could jump you for that offensive tackle. And same thing at edge rusher. I think it's a little bit less of a huge need, but like the Vikings could move up for an edge rusher. I think the Broncos could move up for an edge rusher. The Raiders for a running mate to pair with Max Crosby. The Seahawks could use another edge rusher. Like I think there's 3 or 4 teams there that, again, I don't think it's likely that they trade up past the Bears to get an edge rusher, but you have to be prepared for it as a potential quote unquote worst case scenario. But like we talked about at the beginning, in any of these cases, okay, team trades up past you and gets Rome Odunze. Darn. I guess there's only 6 other players I'll happily take at the 9th overall pick, right? Like if somebody tries to, you might love this one guy. You might love Odunze. You might love Joe Alt. You might love Dallas Turner. And you're really, really hoping the Bears get him. And you would be heartbroken and crushed if one of these teams that we just talked about traded up past you to the 8th overall pick, stole that guy you really wanted, one pick before you took him. And you'd feel like this is 2014 all over again, where Aaron Donald goes to the Los Angeles Rams or St. Louis Rams, one pick before the Bears are on the clock. And you really wanted Aaron Donald, and you knew he was going to be a Hall of Famer. You knew he was going to be maybe the greatest defensive player of all time, and you missed him by one pick. That sucks. And you're going to look back at the draft for years and say, man, we were one pick away from getting that guy I really wanted. But you know what? You stay in 2014, and you stay at, I think it was the 14th pick, and get Kyle Fuller, and you still got a Pro Bowl cornerback. Like, you know what I mean? You stay at 9 because somebody jumped you for Rome Odunze, or somebody jumped you for Dallas Turner, or jumped you for Joe Alt. You stay at 9 and go, darn, I guess we got to take Dallas Turner, or I guess we got to take Jared Verse, or I guess we got to take Latu Latu, or we got to take Olu Fashanu. Like, darn, I guess we'll get a different, really, really good player that I like. Like, again, not the player you love, who you really think is the one, but you're really going to you're not going to feel like, oh man, we had to settle for something bad. Like, no, even if someone trades ahead of you to get your guy, there's still 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 other guys that are really good players that you're going to have a chance to pick at the 9th overall pick. So what I like about this discussion is that we're able to both be prepared for the worst possible scenario, and also be really reassured that the Bears are going to be able to come through this draft and get someone good that you like at a position of need. They're going to have the opportunity to get good player to add to this football team at a place where they could really use it. And that's what's so reassuring to me about this draft process, even in the worst case scenarios. I also want to go through the best case scenarios, and we'll do that for next week's mock draft Monday as we kind of go through these hypothetical draft scenarios. So you got to make sure then that you're subscribed to the Locked On Bears podcast to make sure you're keeping up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Really appreciate all of you that are our everydayers here on the podcast. Coming up, we're going to record an interview this week with Matt Waldman from the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. I'm not sure if that podcast is going to come out on Friday or if we're going to hold it till next week, because I think we're going to record the interview on Thursday afternoon. And so then we'll figure it out in our content calendar, but we're really going to dive into what's fair and unfair about comparing Caleb Williams and Patrick Mahomes in particular. And also Matt's really good at evaluating receivers and running backs and tight ends and quarterbacks as well. And we'll kind of talk bigger picture about the draft too, but I'm really looking forward to that conversation. We got more ways to slice and dice this draft and get you ready for all of the Bears picks in every possible scenario for draft day next week. So keep coming back for more. And in exchange, I promise to always make time for you to bear down.